Great.
Okay, we ready to make a start? I'll do a share.
I think so.
Okay, let's hope it still works. Okay, you just click on the bars along the top. Yeah, along the top of the pictures of the thumbnails. You'll get a series of blue bars come up. Okay. All right. Can you see me? No. Oh, okay. Not to worry. Right. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for giving us a chance to talk to Doncaster beekeepers tonight. Haven't spoken to you before, so I hope you find this interesting. The title of the talk is The Mating Biology of Honeybees. And when we put the talk together, Claire thought, well, that doesn't look too interesting. We're not sure we're going to get many people to listen to that. So we decided instead we call it Sex and the Wanton Virgin Queen. We thought, well, that'll get people interested. So in the talk tonight, we are going to look at why honeybees mate differently from other bee species. We're going to introduce the two key players in the talk. We're going to look at their sensory capabilities, because that's very important. Consider drone congregation areas, and is there a different way of looking at them? Discuss the mating process, and then look at what happens afterwards. So this is my beekeeping hero. We've all got a beekeeping hero, and this is mine. This is Gudrun Kerniger. Now, she may not be instantly recognizable, but she's written quite a few books. Honeybees of Borneo is a great book. And also she's written in Mating Biology of Honeybees, and I think she wrote in Rinder's Honeybee Genetics as well. So she's definitely one of the people that I've looked to put this talk together. And the fact is that she said, we do not know any other animal with such an extraordinary and bizarre complex of mating behavior. And that sort of got me thinking. I thought, well, if Gudrun thinks it's that unusual, perhaps we ought to look at it a bit more in depth and see if we can understand a bit more about it. So the first thing we need to do is to look and see how other honeybee or other bee or even bee-related insects mate. So if we look at wasps, butterflies, for example, and bumblebees. Now, wasps and bumblebees, they're cousins of honeybees. And the reason that I put the butterflies in is because, to be honest, I've never seen a wasp or a bumblebee mating, but I've seen
a bumblebee mate.
Have you? Oh, okay, right. Did it take a long time?
Ages. They were at it for ages.
Yeah, and this is the point. So I've seen butterflies mating, and they go tail to tail and conjoin, as it were, and they spend, like Claire said, absolutely ages joined up there. And the other problem is that once you're sort of joined like this, invariably you can't fly very well. The butterflies can fly a little bit, but you invariably land up down in the grass, and you sort of think to yourself, well, how successful is that? I suppose it's okay, but you think it could be a problem if somebody steps on you. The other thing is that because they are joined for so long, they're able, the males are able to transfer the sperm into the queens much more slowly, and therefore they don't actually damage any of their organs. And as you'll see when we talk about honeybees a bit later on, it's not like that for honeybees. So there is this slow transfer of sperm, and in actual fact, drone wasps can mate more than once. When they mate with the queen, they don't pass all their sperm over, and they save a bit because they think there's a fair chance they may be able to mate again. The other thing to look at there, of course, is that most of these species only mate once. One drone, one queen, that's it. And also, I would draw your attention to, because we're going to talk about this a little bit further along, is the fact that in those pictures, the males are smaller than the females. If you compare that with honeybees, there they are up in the sky. We know that they multiply mate. Up until I think about 1940s, they thought that perhaps honeybees only mated once, but we now know that they multiply mate perhaps 15, maybe 20 times, and they do it in the air.
What's the technical term for that, Martin?
What, mating in the air?
No, multiple mating.
Oh, multiple mating. Polyandry,
Yeah.
isn't it? So, yeah. So let's have a look at some other honeybee species around the world. So we've got, these are Apis species, so Apis florea, Apis androformis, Apis dorsata. They're the big ones that hang under the rocks, and you see these very brave, intrepid men going up with, you know, just a loincloth and some smoking grass to cut the honey out of the combs up there. That's Apis dorsata, and that's our own Apis mellifera. That's probably what they would do if they were left out in a tree. But the thing is that these are all social groups. They're not solitary. This is what we term as an extended family, the superorganism. And I'm going to bat this over to Claire and see if she'd like to expand on that and explain why they need this polyandrous mating system.
Okay, so it's a trendy way of superorganism. I have trouble saying that sometimes say the wrong thing. The superorganism is basically one big family, and within that family, there are specific roles. So the queen bee is the only one that lays eggs generally, and then you've got all the workers that do all of the other jobs, and then you've got the drones that are just around for mating, really. And because this family goes through the whole year, so it's not just there for summer, it goes through winter as well, you need as many skill sets as you can. So we all know that workers do all of the jobs in the colony, and we all learn that when a worker bee is born, she starts out as a cleaner and a nurse bee, and she goes through this sequence of jobs which ends up with her being a forager, and so she's a Jill of all trades. That's not strictly true. There are bees that are specialists, and if the queen mates with loads of different drones, there's more chance that you're going to get more of these specialists in there. So an example of a specialist would be a scout bee. A scout bee's got higher dopamine levels and have got exploratory nature, and will go out and find good sources of flowers or go and find a new home when they're house hunting. But also there's what you call rare patrolines. So there's some of the specialists, for example, hygienic behaviour, bees that can detect larvae that are not very well and perhaps week out sick larvae, maybe containing a varroa, or what other rare patrolines would there be?
Yeah, you have varroa sensitive hygiene particularly, and different other skill sets in the nest, you know, perhaps something that is particularly akin to guarding or something like that. Some bees may be more appropriate for guarding or something like that.
Yeah, so and even water gathering. So you get bees that are specifically, when they get to foraging age, they only collect water, and if the colony didn't need water, they just loaf around. So you do get bees that are specialists, and these specialists are important because it kind of extends the flexibility of the colony. It gives them, it's a bit like a Swiss Army knife with loads of different attachments instead of just having a knife with 3 blades. So the more diversity there is within the colony, because the queen's mated with loads and loads of different drones, the better that colony has of surviving, because it's got lots and lots of skills at its disposal.
So I guess the thing is, what we need to say is that the Apis species have therefore developed and evolved this system where they're going to mate with as many drones as they can, as quickly as they can. And the way they've done this is to mate within what we refer to as a drone congregation area. And you've always got to remember that we pull this back really to evolution. It's not a conscious decision made by the bees that, oh, if I go out and mate with more drones, I'm going to be more successful. It's the fact that these multi-mated queens, tend to head up the fittest colonies. I think, Claire, is it not right that multi-mated queens have better gut bacteria and produce more pheromone?
Yeah, there's a lot of research now to support the fact that queens that manage to mate with as many unrelated drones as possible, they've got better gut bacteria, they produce better quality and more pheromones, therefore they get looked after better. They'll probably last a lot longer than queens that haven't been mated well. So the ones that manage a diverse mating will be better all-round colonies.
Yeah, and it will be their genetics that go into the next generation. So basically, this type of mating is a product of its success.
Yes.
Now, one of the interesting things with honeybee mating is that you get a very male bias sex ratio. We know that if you look through a colony, they're producing hundreds and hundreds of drones, good strong colonies, but they may only produce 4, 5 or 6 virgin queens. And this ratio is really unusual in insects. If you think about solitary bees, they have a ratio much more like 1 to 1, that when they produce offspring, you get them coming out of these little bee hotel things, made up with bamboo and that sort of thing. If you work out and sex those bees as they emerge, it's roughly 50-50 males and females, that they want a very even split. And people sort of say, well, drones are expensive. It's only wealthy colonies that produce drones. But if you think about it, a drone actually doesn't require so much investment in terms of the colony that's needed to look after it. So drones are within reason, that they independent, they can feed themselves and they fly out and they come back and they exist independently. But if you think about a queen, she needs to have 5,000, 10,000 bees attending her. So from that point of view, she is much more expensive. And that's why the colonies see drones as more expendable. And if, for example, at the moment, if you see a colony that's running short of food, it'll be the drones that they kick out. They are seen by the colony as much more expendable. So if we look at the drone congregation area a little bit in terms of the advantages, there's a graph on the left, and Claire said she didn't want to do the graph, but if you
hate graphs.
If you look at that curve there, it sort of reckons that most of the change in the colony can be achieved by about 6 or 7 matings. And then, as you see, that graph flattens out to almost a straight line at the top. But the queen will still go on mating, perhaps up to 15 or 20, without any real appreciable difference. But that's where those rare patrilines that Claire was talking about come in.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the behaviours that these rare patrilines would be hygienic behaviour, and hygienic behaviour is something that's very sought after, especially in terms of varroa. But if you have too many bees in the colony displaying hygienic behaviour, the colony will become lopsided, and they'll start not just cleaning out larvae that have got varroa or are sick, they'll start cleaning out healthy larvae as well. So some behaviours, you only have a certain amount of them, otherwise it could actually work against the colony.
Yeah, they're sort of rare for a reason. And wasn't it Marla Spivak in America, she produced that Minnesota hygienic bee, and she reckoned at one stage she went too far, and they were clearing out healthy brood as well, because she'd over-egged the rare patrilines.
I think really what a colony is aiming for at all times is balance. And if you get lopsided in your skills, then the colony will, you can't have everything in excess. So if you're overbred for something like hygienic behaviour, what they're saying now, or one of the latest bits of research I read about, was if you overbreed for hygienic behaviour, that colony hasn't got the ability to eliminate toxins like pollution and chemicals and things like that. So we're not clever enough to get that balance, and evolution takes millions of years in order to achieve that. So we should be careful how we breed our bees and how we select, how we cherry pick characteristics.
The other thing, of course, with DCAs is because the queen can get in, mated quickly and back home again, she's less likely to get taken by a swallow. And I always say to new beekeepers, you'll look at swallows in a different light once you're a beekeeper, because there's always that concern. And of course, for the drones themselves, once they're traveling to a DCA or in it, you know, it's more like a fish being in a large shoal. It's less likely to be them that's picked on. So there is a degree of safety in numbers for them as well. So let's talk about the two creatures that we're going to talk about today, the drones and the virgin queens. Okay. Strong colonies, as we know, produce drones. Weak colonies or failing queens, they might not produce any drones at all in a season. The colony needs to be wealthy to do that. And of course, virgin queens can be produced with regard to by swarming, supersedure, or even emergency. We're not going to go into that in this particular talk. That's probably another whole talk on its own. But let's leave it that our colony is producing drones and it's producing virgin queens. And let's have a look at these two. So looking at the drone first, they have these wonderfully large eyes. Not only do they have about twice as many lenses as a worker and considerably more than a queen, but their eyes are broken up into areas. And so the top part of their eyes, if you think they've got this wonderful ability that they can actually look up without having to tilt their head up, because their lenses are up over the top of their head. And that's really important, because when they're in the drone congregation area, it means that they can look up and observe a virgin queen, particularly as a dark spot against a very bright background. So they have these very high levels of temporal and spatial resolution, specifically designed for spotting queens. They also, of course, have this extra antennal segment, and they have, I think it's something like about 16,000 of these little sensitive pores and plates on their antenna, which we call sensilla in general. And it's more than just the fact that they've got so many of these sensilla. They're actually specific to queen mandibular pheromone, the 9-ODA and the 9-HDA that the queen's giving off from her mandibles. And it means that whereas a worker may have sensilla that are good at picking up pheromones from all different things, they're more of a Jill of all trades, that the drones are specific to queen mandibular pheromone. They also have these sensilla hardwired into these processes in the brain called the glomerular areas. And basically what happens is that when they pick up the mandibular pheromone, it's basically hardwired into their brain so that they can react so quickly to it. They are specifically designed for this pheromone. You can't overestimate that.
So how far away do they have to be to sniff a virgin then?
Well, they reckon they can take pheromone down to about the level of one molecule almost, and they reckon that they can sense virgin queen pheromone at about 800 meters. It's a fair old way.
Impressive.
Of course, they need to keep this all these special senses shipshape and Bristol fashion, as it were. So you always see the drones. It's lovely to watch. When they come out, they use their little foreleg and they rake it over their eyes and get the dust off and everything. And they've got a little notch in their front leg, and it means that they can put their antenna in this notch and drag the antenna through, because they want their senses to be absolutely at their peak so that they can sense out these virgin queens that are coming along. What's the notch called? What's the notch called?
Stridula. Is that right?
It goes back to this ancient Roman thing of they used to use a strigil to clean the muck and the olive oil off themselves in the hot baths and everything. So that's where it comes from. But yeah, you won't find that in many books. It's called a stridula.
It must mean something to do with rubbing or scraping, because when grasshoppers make that noise, they call it they're stridulating.
Yeah. The other thing with drones, and this is the impressive bit, is they have this huge endophallus. Claire's cackling away over there. I'll let you take this slide if you're not careful, that weighs about 13% of their body weight. I don't want anybody doing any calculations on how much they weigh and what they think that should mean. But, you know, what it basically means is that the bulk of their abdomen is full of this inverted endophallus that is ready to push out to mate with the queen. So again, very much designed for this single one act of mating. Okay, it basically means that when he mates with a queen, he's all in. And the reason for that is because in a drone congregation area with thousands of other drones, his chances of mating with another queen are basically nil. And so it's a situation where do it once, do it right, and that's it. And that's what he's designed to do.
Martin, he can't actually make any more sperm, can he? It's like he's not continually making sperm.
No, that's right, actually. As a larva, his testes will be at their largest and he will make the sperm at that stage of his development. So when he's actually emerging from the cell, for that first 12 days, his sperm are actually maturing in his body, but his testes have atrophied. So therefore, no, you're right. Once he's ready to fly, he's got all the sperm he's ever going to have. It's not a continual thing like most other male creatures. But they don't fight for territory like other males. Do you want to talk about this a bit, Claire? It's interesting stuff because they're so gentle compared with other male animals.
Yeah, in most species of animal, the males are very dominant things and they fight for females, and usually within a pack or a herd there'll be a dominant male which is the only one that's allowed to mate, and so it's a very exclusive thing. But in honeybees it's completely different. The males are not dominant, there's loads of them, and they actually cooperate in that once a male is mated with the virgin, then another male will be almost like guided in to do so by the sort of signals that are left behind. So it's a completely different sort of reversal of roles. They're not aggressive. They don't even have a sting. They don't fight. It's a very passive thing, and it's just a completely different system than most other animal species.
And of course, we need to remember that workers and queens are genetically the same. You know, they can take a fertilized egg and they can turn it into a worker, or they can feed it differently, turn it into a queen. But a drone being haploid is different. And you can see in the picture there, you know, that there's sort of similarity apart from the abdomen between the queen and the worker, but the drone's just completely different. So he's got that bigger antennal segment. He's got those larger eyes. He's got this huge thorax with these big, powerful wing muscles in, and then the large abdomen to have this huge endophallus in. So the question is, why are drones so big? Why do they need to be bigger? Because if you think about it, they don't actually fly any faster. People sort of, some people I know sort of think that drones fly faster than workers, but that's not really true. And the amount of sperm that they're carrying is actually not that different from a worker coming back with a full crop of honey or a full load of pollen. So they're not carrying any more payload, as it were. And they're actually not very economical when it comes to flying. They burn more honey per kilometer, if you want to put it that way, a bit like you would if you were analyzing how fuel efficient a car was. So they are nowhere near as efficient flyers as workers. So why are they so big? Why are they so powerful?
Can I just say it's not to be appealing to the virgin queen, because she never sees him really, does he? He goes up behind, he sneaks up behind, she never sees him. So he doesn't, nothing to do with what he looks like. Physical
prowess has nothing to do with it. No, he's certainly not doing this a lot, you know. So does size matter for drones? The answer is yes, it does. As we said, not important for sperm load, not important for flight time or speed, but the picture of the helicopter there is just to put it in perspective. A drone is able to carry about 50% of his own body weight, and a Chinook helicopter can do about 30-odd%. So they have massive lift capacity. And if you think about this virgin queen that's in this drone congregation area, and she wants to mate with about 15, possibly even 20 drones. If that drone wasn't able to carry her for a period of time, when he sort of starts to grasp hold of her and she's not able to fly so much and he's still able to fly, he can carry the load and keep her, I was going to say afloat, but you know what I mean, sort of keep her up in the air in that drone congregation area. Because one of the things we do know is that if a queen drops out of the congregation area, she ceases to become attractive to the drone. She has to stay within this swirling mass. And so part of the function of the drone being so big is to keep the queen up there. And if each time she mated, she dropped and dropped and dropped, she would either fall out of the drone congregation area or even may land up down in the grass. And again, those genetics are then not going to get through into the next generation so easily. So there's our cuddly furry boy. Say looks can be deceiving, and they're often seen as fat and lazy creatures that just eat food, and some people consider them expendable for varroa control, but they are in actual fact one of the most highly specialized and well-developed creatures in the natural world. And you know, each time you look at them, you have to marvel and think, yeah, he is solely designed for the purpose in hand. There he is, the perfectly formed, single-minded mating machine. So that's the drones. We'll have a little look at the virgin queens now. I know this is one of Claire's sort of things that she's really interested in, so I'm going to let you take this one, Claire.
Okay, so when a virgin queen first emerges from her cell, contrary to popular belief, she doesn't immediately fly out to get mated or fly off with another swarm if it's in the swarming situation. She'll usually hang around for a week because she needs to sexually mature. And for the first 3 days when she comes out, the other bees virtually ignore her. She hasn't developed her queen pheromones quite yet, and she'll feed herself and look after herself. And very often, if you see if you open a hive and a virgin pops out and you see her, she sort of scoots, she almost surfs across the bees and runs around. And sometimes she'll do that piping noise, but they virtually ignore her. And so after about day 3, her pheromones start to change. So she starts to emit queenly pheromones and she'll start soliciting for food, and they'll start feeding her at that point. So I think it's really important, especially if you're making up mini nukes and things, to put some kind of protein food in there as well, in the little feeding compartment, so that when your virgin emerges, she's got some protein that she can top her diet up with.
Yeah, it's interesting because we actually incubate some virgin queens sometimes, and we always put a little bit of candypoline in the end, just a smear, but they don't need any attendance. They feed themselves. It's really interesting.
It can take anything from 7 days to 10 days for her to become sexually mature and strong enough to fly. And she will take some orientation flights to start with, just to learn where the hive is. But usually before her mating flight, she'll kind of be hounded out of the hive by the other bees. The other bees will decide when it's time for her to go out. It's not usually her choice. She has to be cajoled to go out there. And often with a swarm as well, if your colony is cast swarming, if the old queen has gone with the prime swarm, and then you've got virgins hatching out intermittently, they don't always want to go, the virgins. They usually get, sort of hounded out and cajoled out. In fact, we had a cast swarm go out yesterday, didn't we? From our observation hive. And they all swirled around out there, and we could hear the virgins still in the observation hive piping away. And eventually all the bees came back again. And when they eventually settled down, they gave her a hell of a telling off. They were chasing her around and biting her and giving her a hard time.
So what about the sensory capability of the queen then, Claire? Are you on a par with the drones?
No, not at all. She hasn't got very developed sensory organs at all. She's got not as many lenses on her eyes. She hasn't got a very good sense of smell. She has even less sensilla placodia on her antennae than workers. So she's not really sensed up at all. You know, when the queen goes out on her flight, she's not really able to look for anything, I don't think.
Yeah, one of the interesting, although we talked about queens and workers coming from the same egg, potentially, In actual fact, workers have better developed senses than queens. So there's almost something in the feeding of the queen, that epigenetics, I think they call it.
Yeah, epigenetics.
That actually seems to switch off some of her sensory capability.
Yeah, and but she's makes up for it in other ways. So the energy goes into making all her ovaries and ovarials and her extended abdomen. And so she's specialized for a different kind of job than the workers, but senses is not one of her fortes.
Shall we put that with a bit of fun? Shall we therefore play Honeybee Top Trumps? Okay, you can. Yeah, you're going to play the part of the queen, and I'll play the part of the drone. Okay, and we'll see who's best developed here. Okay.
I'm rubbish at card games.
That's all right. I'll press the button. Don't you worry. So let's look at the eyes then. Okay. So here's your queens.
That's me.
How many lenses have you got there, Claire?
3,500. Is that on both eyes, or is that on each eye?
I'm not actually sure, but whichever way I've done it, it's the same. I'm doing the same scale. Yeah. Here's the drone. 10,000 lenses, so his eyesight is considerably better. And interestingly, I think a worker is somewhere between the two, something at 5,000 odd.
So how does a queen find a drone congregation area if she can't see very well?
Good question, Claire. Good question. We're getting there. Let's take the eyes out and let's have a look at her antennal senses. How many sensilla have you got there then, Claire?
1,600. I
think I could beat that. Here's my drone, 16,000 sensilla. So 10 times the amount. He's has a much better sensory capacity than the Virgin Queen.
So that means if I'm flying out looking for a DCA, I'm not going to see it very well and I'm not going to smell it very well. So how do I find it? Good
question, Claire. What about pheromones? Now, you might come into your own with this. So here we go. Let's press the button for there. So what are you doing with pheromones?
I've got shed loads of pheromones wafting out of me.
And very attractive to drones as well.
Extremely attractive to drones.
Unfortunately, the drone is not so good in this area. We only produce small amounts of mandibular pheromone. And in actual fact, we don't find it particularly that it attracts virgin queens. It actually seems to attract other drones more than anything.
Can't smell it anyway.
No. This is the thing. There is one research paper that I found that suggests that that virgin queens have limited attraction to drone pheromone, but it's far from conclusive. It's nowhere near like the fact of how attractive drones are to queen pheromone. Queens seem to have very little, if any, attraction to drone pheromone.
So what you're saying, Martin, is it's the drones are attracted to the virgins, not the virgins that are attracted to the drones.
Well, you see, this is the thing. If you read a book, and you know, I can remember when I did some modules and what have you, and you read what it says, and it says the drones go out and find a congregation and make up this congregation area, and then the queen comes and finds it, and that's all they say. And the question has to be, how do they find it? And you know, it's like I put on the screen there. It's very often assumed that the Virgin Queen finds the drone congregation area. And if so, the question must be, how has she evolved to do this? Because she has no well-developed senses and has little, if any, attraction to drone pheromone. It just doesn't seem to make any evolutionary sense. If the queen was going to find the drone, her senses should be much better at finding things. So what about the drones themselves? How do they find a congregation area? I think what we need to do is we need to get away from the idea that drones have this X marks the spot map in their head of where they're going to go and meet up. They don't think, oh, you know, I'm going to go down the road behind the post office across 2 fields and there's a clump of trees there and that's where we're off to. Because otherwise, if you move bees up and down across the country, they wouldn't have a clue where to go if they were going with the map idea. So they must be using sensory systems that respond to things in the landscape to try and do this. Does anyone know where we're going? Does someone have a map? What about the Virgin Queen? You see, again, if she's just going out scouting around looking for drones, she's vulnerable. All the time she's out there, she's vulnerable. Surely the system must be that she has to get to this drone congregation area precisely and quickly and get home again.
Get the job done, come home, have a cup of tea.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working on the theory. Because she's so good at producing pheromone, it's her pheromone that has to advertise her to the drones. Now, there are some other theories about, and I'm not going to diss any of them, because they all have merit. And we know that drones have magnetite in their bodies. Interestingly, so do workers. But some people believe that there may be energy lines, they may be ley lines, call them what you like, and the magnetite may be working somewhere to help guide drones towards these. I'm not sure. Do you have any theories about that, Claire?
I don't believe a bar of it.
I'm prepared to keep an open mind. I'm not so bad as you. We did watch Roger's talk the other day about it, and I'm not fully convinced, but he was very convinced about it's the ability of energy fields to attract swarms, but he didn't produce an awful lot about drone congregation areas.
Pass.
This guy's important. This is Beowulf Cooper in his book, The Honeybees of the British Isles. Great book, actually, if you want to read a chapter on supersedure and swarming and how the two morph together. But he also talks about mating behavior and how the weather can affect it. And so we have anything from what we would call major distant assembly mating. And that's when you get, lovely, long, warm, hot days. And, the weather's settled. I can't even remember what that looks like, to be honest, the way it is at the moment. Minor local assembly matings where the weather's sort of a bit in and out, but it's good enough for flying. And then you get apiary vicinity mating, which is when the weather's really rubbish and your colony fills up with drones. We get that sometimes, don't we, Claire?
Yeah, we've noticed over the past 5 years, really, if you get a period of poor weather or not very good weather, not good enough for a proper drone congregation area to form, and you've got a virgin in a colony and you're waiting for that virgin to mate, that colony will fill up with drones, and they seem to come from everywhere. And it's not just drones from her own colony, it seems to be everyone else's drones from everywhere around piles into that colony. And it's not that they're going to mate in there, because they can't physically do it. And we know honeybees don't mate within the colony. But if there was a window in the weather, like the weather is at the moment, where it's just chopping and changing all day, say there was half an hour of sunshine like there was this afternoon, and the virgin thinks, I'll just pop out a minute and see if I get lucky. She'll fly out and they'll all fly out afterwards, after her, and they'll mate somewhere nearby. So it's a sort of backup plan, or plan B, really, to ensure diversity still.
So is there anything else that we could think about that may be a signal to the bees as to how to go and set up or find or form a drone congregation area? And I put this up here. Does wind direction play a part? When the drones and the virgin queens exit the hive, they may orientate to the direction of the breeze. There's a suggestion that drones will fly into the wind, virgin queens will fly with the breeze behind them. Now, I've looked at my own apiary with this in mind, and my own apiary is fairly high up, not too badly exposed, but I would say during the summertime, the wind comes from, or the breeze comes from the south and the west, probably 9 days out of 10, something like that. There is a predominant breeze, and you wonder whether that's influencing which direction the bees fly in. So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. Why do the virgin queens orientate this way? Well, remember, she's giving off a large amount of pheromone, and her queen mandibular pheromone is a very oily pheromone. It has low volatility, and it's not wafting around like Chanel No. 5. So if she's out in the air, it's not going to dissipate all around her, but it will be carried ahead of her on the breeze. We know that the drone is particularly good at detecting her pheromone above all else. The drones, by flying upwind, will therefore be able to pick up the presence of any queen pheromone coming downwind towards them. And so it is them that may maneuver themselves into a position to intercept her, as it were. And it also actually offers one other very interesting idea, and that is any system would have to be able to prevent inbreeding. We don't want queens and drones from the same colony mating with each other. Otherwise, you start getting that pattern brood, and
just not healthy.
Just not healthy. No. Now, I'm not claiming any sort of rights on this. But if you look around, several other people have talked about it. The American researcher Norman Gary said that drones are attracted upwind to the odor of the queen. GD Tribe from South Africa said that on leaving their hives, drones fly mainly upwind until they encounter a turbulent area where they await a queen. Our friend Gudrun Kerniger, who we met in the third slide, she says, the drone swarm always orientates from downwind of the queen. And then this guy Horridge, who wrote a book about visual systems in bees, he actually says bees may fly across the wind searching for an odor trail and then turn upwind against the ground motion and track the odor to its source. So there does seem to be several people that think that this idea of wind direction and carrying the scent downwind may have some bearing. And I suppose if you think about it, and any sort of smell or scent is going to be stronger downwind than upwind. It sort of makes sense in a way. So just to put a little bit of animation on that, here's our hives here, and here's our wind direction up the top, blowing from left to right. And so we know that the drones fly earlier in the day. They will go out and set up first. So here's our drones. They're going to come out and they're going to fly around and they're going to go upwind. And then a bit later on in the day, the queen comes out and she flies downwind. Now, that's all very well and good, but we also know that bees don't want to, I've put crossbreeding there, I'm not sure that's really what I meant, but breeding between different species of bees.
You mean like the different Apis species, so like Apis cerana can't breed with Apis mellifera?
Yeah, and that's why we can't crossbreed Asian honeybees with European honeybees to produce something that may be more Varroa resistant.
Are they attracted to them?
Yeah, this is part of the issue. So if you live in a country where there are more than one Apis species, so the Kernigers did a lot of work in Borneo, they actually all use queen mandibular pheromone 9-ODA as an attractant. So there's no reason why one species couldn't be attracting the other species. So what they do is they try and fly at different times of the day, and they actually use different areas to congregate in.
Occasionally, there has been cases where Apis cerana has tried to mate with Apis mellifera, and they've actually mounted, but then they've got stuck, haven't they? Because nothing's the right size.
Yeah, this is part of the problem. That there have been, like I say, the attraction works, but if the drone impregnates the queen, they can't seem to unconjoin or whatever, and it all sort of gets stuck. So just have a look at that in a bit more detail, what we mean. They discover that different species of bees use the landscape in a different form to produce their mating areas. So if we look at the jungle here, where they did a lot of their work, Apis cerana, the Asian honeybee, that tends to look for more open areas in the forest, and it also looks for flying very early in the afternoon, probably just after lunch, something like that. Apis koshevnikovi, they will be looking to use low-lying foliage, but under branches, and they'll fly more mid-afternoon. And then Apis dorsata, the giant Asian honeybee, that flies later in the day, so perhaps even at dusk almost, but they will mate under the high canopy of the tree. So you've got different races, different species of bees using the landscape in a different way to try and achieve their drone congregation areas in order to get mated so that the two won't cross over. And that sort of leads us into some very famous work that was actually done by the Ruttner brothers, Friedrich and Hans, in Austria. Do you think that work in Austria, Claire, can be transposed over to other areas?
No, I think because it's a different geography. So I think drone congregation areas form differently depending on the landscape. Say for Cornwall, when I first talked about drone congregation areas, when I did a lecture in Cornwall, they all looked at me and said, we don't have those here. And they had a flat landscape. You could see how they could see it didn't apply to them.
Yeah, the Rutners did some really good work, and it seems to have stuck. But of course, Austria has this very strict sort of geography there, where you have these steep-sided valleys, and they said that the drones appeared to congregate towards the depletions on the horizon. Well, if you think about it, that means you're basically going to go up the valley or down the valley. You're not going to go up over the sides. They also suggested that the drone congregation areas seem to occur in the same area day after day. And of course, if you've only got two choices and the wind is blowing in one direction, that may suggest that that's why the drone congregation area ends up down one end of the valley or the other. The problem with their work was, and it's very valid because they did an awful lot of really good research there, that they found that some of the things that still hold very true, that the number of drones you get at a drone congregation area is probably up around about 10,000. And I think they said from their work that they could identify 200 different colonies there. So a real mix of drones and genetics to be able to provide this polyandrous nature for the queen to get mated well. But they did admit that when they went to the flat plains of Germany to try and do the same sort of work, they found that the congregation areas were much more random. In other words, whichever way the wind perhaps was blowing made the congregation areas set up in a different way. So it's not just me that's sort of saying, is this specific to Austria? Our own guy in this country, Colin Butler, who did all the work on queen pheromones, he was not convinced by this work. And he said that he was able to attract drones to anywhere on a flat plain, I think Salisbury Plain or something like that, where he put up some false queen pheromone in a lure up into the area. He said, I could attract drones anywhere. So the Rutner's work is very valid, but it may be specific to that type of topography that you get in Austria. The other thing we know is that different races of bee, even in our own country, tend to fly and congregate at different heights. So even they are using the landscape in a different way. So the Italian bees, Ligustica, they tend to fly and congregate about 4 meters above the ground, whereas Mellifera carnica, the Carniolans, probably more likely at about 20 meters. And it does call into question perhaps how some people have done breeding with different races of bees in different areas. And, you know, our own brother Adam, who tried to cross different races of bees. You wonder how he managed that in certain instances.
Been confused because Brother Adam famously used an isolation style on Dartmoor called Sherberton, and he took I don't know, 200 virgins up there, and they're all in little mating boxes, and then he took about, I think it was 4 drone colonies up there. And I'm thinking, well, if all the drones go one direction and all the virgins go in another direction, how do they meet? Is it just bumpy into each other on the way home, sort of disappointed and a bit exhausted? Or how does that work? But the weather up there is fairly atrocious, and I'm guessing it probably was apiary vicinity mating, because, you know, Dartmoor is a hard, bleak place with not very good weather conditions. So maybe it worked because it was always apiary vicinity mating.
I think what we can safely say is different landscapes, different weather patterns, and different races of bees influence the type and the way that queens and drones congregate and mate and actually find a way of achieving their mating. So just to confirm what we're hopefully suggesting here, that the 9-ODA mandibular pheromone given off by the virgin queen has low volatility and so will be carried on a current of air rather than being dissipated like some highly volatile wafty scent. And we know that drones are known to be able to detect 9-ODA down to very low levels and at a distance of up to 800 meters. So what we really want to do now is sort of concentrate a bit on what actually happens on mating day. How does it actually how do we foresee things coming about? So finding the queen is only part of the story, but I think if you consider that drones are not very economical flyers, you have to ask yourself whether they're going to be up swirling around, burning fuel all the time in this drone congregation area. One of the things that we know, drones attract drones with their pheromone. And so a lot of people suggest that in actual fact, when drones come out of the hive, if they turn upwind to try and start picking up the scent of a virgin queen, that rather than start flying straight away, they will aggregate on vegetation, perhaps on some bushes or a hedge bank or something like that. And we found that the other year when we went out and did a bit of checking to see if we could attract some drones to some queen pheromone.
Martin had a very, 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 very long piece of bamboo from which we culled from the home apiary with some queen pheromone on a cigarette filter on the end, and we went out, we wafted it around, and when we went near trees and near bushes, we did get quite a plume of very excited boys, and they seemed to come from nowhere. They seemed to come from the trees and the bushes, didn't they?
Yeah, so you know, I'm trying to sort of suggest that these drones will sort of aggregate together, their pheromone will increase and therefore attract other drones from the area. So you get more and more colonies getting together as they move upwind, waiting to pick up the scent of the virgin queen that's coming down the other way. And then when they get the scent of the virgin queen, that then they will go up and start swirling. And like the guy said, they will zigzag across, sort of work out where the scent is coming from, and then almost set their drone congregation area up in a way in which she will basically fly into it, not necessarily by accident, but they will put themselves in the way of where the virgin queen is going to be flying, so that they sort of find her, but they make themselves unmissable, so that she just blunders into them almost. It seems very unlikely that she is going to seek them out in any particular way.
Okay, so when she gets into this, when this drone congregation either forms around her or she flies into it, do her pheromones change at all?
What you got to remember is we've got possibly even 10,000 drones in there, and you may only have, I guess you could have more than one queen. You know, on a good day there'll be several virgins out looking to mate, but if we say there's just one in there and those drones have to pick her out from the other drones and everything, then I guess that they're going to use their sight more when they get up close. Remember, they've got this high resolution vision on the top of their eyes, so they'll be able to home in on her using their vision. But when they get really close, by all accounts, it's her turgid pheromone that's given off that actually encourages them to mount her and start to mate with her. So as soon as she gets into the DCA area, she opens up her sting chamber and lets more pheromone out, and then as the drones home in on her, then the turgid pheromone acts as an aphrodisiac in a way to actually encourage the mounting behavior, and therefore it all happens very quickly. There is a video. Is it More Than Just Honey?
Yeah, More Than Just Honey. If you Google that, you'll get a lovely shot of where they filmed the actual mating act.
It's just a few seconds, but basically the drone will approach the queen from below and behind, and will then grasp her abdomen with his fore and middle pair of legs on the top, and then his other pair of legs, he grasps her underneath. At the same time, he will bend his abdomen round to so that the tip of his abdomen is touching her open sting chamber. And at that stage, the amount of pressure in his abdomen increases so much that it forces his endophallus out and it enters the queen. So the way I can sort of...
Martin's going to demonstrate with his rubber glove.
That's if you can all see it. If not, I'll do it again afterwards when we see. But is that okay? Can you see that? I don't know whether you can see that, but I'll try. So basically, the rubber glove represents his abdomen. And then when you put the pressure on, so the endophallus comes out, okay? If you haven't seen that, we can do it again afterwards. And therefore, and then as soon as his endophallus has pushed inside the queen's sting chamber, her abdomen seems to contract. Some of the books are a little bit vague on this. Some say she's sort of passive, others say she contracts and sort of squeezes it a little bit. But basically, it would appear that he needs that contraction to then turn the partial eversion, which is what he's done firstly, into full eversion, and then he will be able to ejaculate his semen into the queen. Now, by this stage, the drone has sort of let go with his first two pairs of legs and has been sort of carried along behind the queen because he's sort of fainted and passed out. But his sperm will still be being pushed into the queen, because just like a sting that you get in your hand that continues to pulse, so his endophallus and seminal vesicles, which push the sperm in there, they will still be pulsing and pushing the sperm in. So he has these separate ganglia in his abdomen that keep working even though he's already paralyzed. Okay.
This is just seconds, isn't it, Martin? We're not talking a long time here at all.
No, she's got 15 matings to get through. She doesn't want him to be hanging around. It's just a few seconds. So again, we're on to Gudrun Koeniger here, and she says when it comes to the mating flight, it's as short as possible, as long as necessary. That's enough of that animation. Now,
animation's too long, really.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is that there's a lot of talk about is the mating sign, which is what we're going to look at now a little bit. So what is it made of? What is its function? How is it removed? And why does it actually break off? Because didn't you do a talk to some children, Claire, about, and you got lured into honeybee sex?
Oh, it was Widdicombe Primary School, and a girl asked. I tried to be really vague about that bit, but they always ask, and I was looking at the teacher helplessly and being vaguer and vaguer and trying to say things, you know, in not very specific terms, and then the teacher. And the girl still didn't understand, and the teacher just said, "His willy snaps off, and then he dies," and that was it.
Yeah, if there's one thing everybody knows, it's that his willy snaps off and then he dies. So let's have a little bit look at that. So the mating sign is the everted endophallus, okay? And the eversion occurs as a result of the extreme abdominal pressure brought about by the bending of the abdomen. We talked about that. Okay, so it's made up of secretions of the mucus gland and the chitinized plate. So you can see the cutaway drawing there, and you can see the mucus glands, those purple things, okay? And then the endophallus, which is sort of basically that white bit along the bottom, that's sort of inverted. And as it gets pushed out with the abdominal pressure, so it gets filled up with this mucus to give it some rigidity and stability, so that it can actually push into the queen. Because the other thing, of course, it has to be this mating sign or this endophallus is such a tight fit that it makes almost a sterile seal, so that there's no chance of any foreign bodies getting in there. It's a really tight fit.
And no leakage.
No leakage, yeah. But having said all that, one thing that it is not, it's not a plug to hold in the semen. What we do know is that queens that have a mating sign left in them after it's snapped off, so the drone is sort of had sort of snapped off at the point of the mating sign, so the drone's fallen away to the ground dead or dying, and he leaves this sign, this mating sign as we refer to it, sticking out the back of the queen. And what we know is that queens that have a mating sign left in them mate again, and much more quickly than queens that don't have a mating sign. There appears to be either a pheromone, or some people say a reflective UV light that drones are particularly responsive to, that actually attracts more drones in much more quickly. So again, it's another adaptation to encourage drones to mate very quickly, again, to get the queen back as quickly as possible. Now, this part I always could never understand, and that is the fact that the mating sign is left in the queen, but the next drone needs to come along and remove that mating sign in some way in order to insert his own endophallus into the queen. And books again just used to say, oh, well, he takes it out and puts his own endophallus in. Well, how does he take it out? And I always assumed he did it with his back legs, but it would have, because that would infer a conscious act, if you like. But in actual fact, it's just totally not random, but it doesn't require him to do any conscious thought. So do you see on that diagram there, we've got it's a hairy patch actually basically called the vestibulum. And it's basically, think of it like a piece of Velcro basically. And then, so that's on that will be left hanging out the back of the queen. And then when the next drone wants to insert his endophallus, he has a similar piece of Velcro, for want of a better way of putting it, on his endophallus. And the two sort of join up together. And then as he's inserting his endophallus, so he's also at the same time pulling out the mating sign of the previous drone. So it's not a conscious act at all, but it's really important that he actually is able to remove that in order for him to be able to mate again. So in a way, I always think, because we know these polyandrous queens are so successful, the fact that the drone possesses this vestibulum means that without it, the whole polyandrous nature of honeybee mating wouldn't happen, just for a simple hairy patch. And you know, it's a wonderful adaptation. The mating sign has been quaintly referred to in some of the older books. Is it, is it Maeterlinck's Life of the Bee and things like that? Yeah, that they used to use very mellifluous tones, I think, and sort of holding hands beneath the sheets and things like that. But
Queen's nuptial flight.
That's right, yeah. They used to refer to it as a wedding gift of the previous husband to the new one. And the mating sign is this strange sort of thing, because
I've only ever seen it once.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that it's actually the product of two drones, not the product of one drone. So that picture that you see of that queen, I'm sorry, it's a bit fuzzy. It's the best one I could find, but can you see it's got a yellow tip on it? And that means that the mating sign that was left should be white. But when the new drone tries to mate with the queen, he has like some yellow membranes on the horns of his cornua. Do you remember? Can you see those hooks there? And they've got like a yellow tip on the end of them. They look like a pair of horns. So when the new drone attempts to mate with the queen, those yellow filaments rub off onto the mating sign of the previous drone. And so basically, when you see a yellow tipped mating sign hanging out the back of the queen, it basically means that that drone was not able to remove that mating sign. If it was white, it would have been the last mating the queen had had, and she'd gone back to the hive on her own accord. But because it's yellow, it means that the next drone's tried to mate with her, but has left the yellow on there because he hasn't been able to withdraw it. And that is actually one of the key reasons why queens cut short mating flights.
But if she came back and she had that, and she probably, if she wasn't mated sufficiently, because they sometimes go out on several mating flights, don't they? Could the workers remove that and then she can go out again?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we'll look at in a minute is how do queens know how many mating flights to go on? But one of the things is this people say, well, why do queens come back to the hive? One of the key reasons is that this idea of this vestibulum, this hairy patch, pulling out the previous endophallus or mating sign of the drone, doesn't always work. And quite often queens come back because they can't get mated anymore because the mating sign is stuck in there.
It's like a breakdown of the mechanism, really.
So the other thing is, you talked about the willy snapping off, but why does it snap off?
It's not made very well.
There's two things here as far as I can see. because we know the drone is all in on a single mating, he doesn't actually need a mechanism to withdraw the endophallus and use it again. But equally important, if it didn't break off and he was fainted away, she's not strong enough a flyer to make it back to the hive with him in tow, and therefore again she'd be lost in the grass or whatever. So by snapping it off, it means that she can actually fly back to the hive. So I've put a note on the side here. It says everyone seems to know the drone's willy snaps off, and this always appears to be especially funny to ladies groups like the WI and the Town's Women's Guild.
Cackle.
They do indeed, don't they? So how do queens know when they've had a sufficiently good mating? Can they count? I think Dave Tarpey, you met him in America. Yeah. Didn't he say something about there's pressure in the oviducts?
Yeah, it's nothing to do with counting. It's to do with the pressure in the oviducts. So when there's a sufficient pressure in the oviducts, they give it up after that.
Yeah, it also seems that some queens actually seem genetically inclined to go out on more mating flights. But I think they did a lot of work, and they showed there was very little difference in the amount of sperm in them, depending on how many times they'd gone out. So what happens to all this sperm then? 15 drones worth of sperm. What happens to it while she's in flight? Do you want to talk a bit about that?
While she's in flight, it basically it's forced up into the common media and the lateral oviduct. So it all gets shoved up inside her, basically. And then as she's flying, it gradually, I thought that happened when she came back to the hive.
It does, yeah. So when she's in flight, all this sperm is just pushed forward, just keep pushing it forward, pushing it forward, pushing it forward.
So it's just the pressure of more sperm coming in that pushes it.
It seems to be, yeah.
Cupboard, as it were.
It seems to be compartmentalized, isn't quite the right word, but pocketed up into the different groups at that particular stage. And you've got to remember that one drone would actually carry enough sperm on his own to fill the spermatheca, which we'll look at in a minute. So
it's basically, it's not going straight into the spermatheca, it's getting packed away, shoved in cupboard, and then later on, it kind of transfers to the spermatheca.
That's right, yeah, there we go. So on a mating flight, she probably picks up between 70 and 100 million sperm. But we know that a spermatheca normally holds about 5 to 7 million. So she loses over a period of about 24 hours. She expels about 90% of the sperm she picked up. But it's not just a straightforward ooze it out, as it were. We know that each and every drone, it doesn't matter whether it's the first one or the last one, each and every drone that mated with her will have his sperm represented in the spermatheca.
So as this sperm is being forced out slowly, is the spermatheca sort of hoovering it up as it passes by?
Yeah, there's a valve fold in there, isn't there? I think some people refer to it as a sperm press or something, but there's this muscular organ that every so often sort of pushes up and pushes a degree of sperm up into the spermatheca, where it's sort of hoovered up in.
And then once it's in the spermatheca, does it get homogenized?
I think when it's probably full, I think probably there isn't much wiggle room for the sperm in there. But I think as she uses her sperm over time, so I think there must be more mixing.
Yeah. So as the queen empties her spermatheca, the sperm becomes more homogenized. So you're going to get a more diverse workforce. But sometimes you do seem to get visible patrilines within the colony. You see sort of like family groups much more by their coloration and their markings.
So the spermatheca itself is a wonderful piece of kit. We know it has high levels of potassium ions, and it has a high pH, around about 8.7. And it also contains higher levels of a sugar known as trehalose. Now, I hadn't really heard much about this, but Claire, that's something to do with being able to reinvigorate a creature or an organism?
Yeah, you've got high levels in the spermatheca, but it's also present in high levels in animals like, I think they're called sea monkeys. So they're little desiccated things that can live for years and years in dormant state. And then when you put water with them, they come alive again. And trehalose is involved in that process. And the same as with seeds that can be dormant for a long time. And then, I don't know, many years later can get triggered again, and it's this sugar tree hallow.
Yeah, it seems to be it seems to allow something to almost desiccate down, and then sort of, it's almost by magic, come back from the dead. I mean, obviously sperm aren't quite like that, but they are
latent energy, isn't it?
Yeah, and the sperm are held in this near anaerobic state for anything up to 5 years. And I think you'll find, if you look around, most insects can't get anywhere near that in terms of sperm viability over that length of time. So apart from the fact that the whole mating process is amazing, you know, you have David Attenborough's going off around the world looking for amazing animals doing wonderful things. Here, right on our own doorstep, it is a unique feat within the animal kingdom.
So what you're saying is, in the spermatheca, this anaerobic state, they're not all wiggling around, sort of, you know, swimming around all of the time. They're kind of dormant, and then they get integrated just before they.
That's right. There's a tracheal net across the top of the spermatheca, and then there are secretions from the spermathecal gland that actually sort of reinvigorate the sperm as they're pumped out and down and put onto the egg by the queen. So yeah, they are certainly not wiggling around in the spermatheca waiting to go. That they are in a very reduced state of motion. And that really, I think, is about it.
Well, just can I say that the honeybee is not the only insect. A lot of insects have spermathecas, even Varroa, because if you think about it, if an insect had to have sex every time it wanted to lay an egg, it wouldn't lay any eggs, because they lay eggs. Most insects lay lots and lots of eggs, because that's the way they reproduce. So many insects have spermathecas. It's not just unique to the honeybee.
It's not unique, but you'll find that most of those other creatures don't have the ability to keep the sperm viable for so long.
They can probably top up, can't they?
I think certain ants do, and I believe some sort of wasp does as well. They actually do a bit of in-nest mating to top up the sperm. So I think that's about it. We'll leave you with Bob, who's joined the Mile High Club, and then we will see if anybody wants to ask any questions. Let's stop the share. There we go.
Hi. Well, we've got one question. How does the queen decide to lay drone eggs rather than workers?
Do you want to do that one? You need to unmute.
I think it's to do with the, she measures the size of the cell. So it's the size of the cell initially. So if it's a large cell, she'll lay a drone egg, or she won't fertilize that egg. And if it's a small cell, but I also suspect that those cells are laced with pheromones as well. When I've watched our queen in the observation hive roaming around laying eggs, it seems that she sticks her head right inside that cell before she decides to dunk her bum in. And I'm sure she's picking up some kind of pheromonal clue. She doesn't decide. It's the workers also that polish that cell up and make it ready. She won't lay in a cell unless it's polished up and prepared for her properly. So almost the decision is not hers. She's just responding to the cues that are given by the way that the size of the cell and the way it's been prepared for her.
The one that's always interested me is it must be to do with pheromone as much as size of cell, because a queen cell will be as big as a drone cell, if not bigger. So it strikes me that you know, they're never going to put a haploid drone egg in a queen cup. So I guess it must be pheromone as much as size.
Certainly from observation, she sticks her head right in there, and you can see her antennae moving around. So she is picking up some kind of pheromonal clue, I think.
I think that's all we've got at the moment. There's no more questions. You people saying that it was. Oh, I've got one here. Will a virgin queen be a percentage smaller? I think I may have seen one recently, but it looked very small. So I'm not sure whether she'd make a good queen. I suppose until she's mated, she changes in size once she's mated, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. Virgin queens can look quite puny. In fact, their abdomens, I've seen them when their abdomens are like little tiny triangles. And I remember the same thing when I was beginning beekeeping. I thought, well, there's a queen, but she doesn't look right. And once she's mated, she will kind of swell up. That whole abdomen will swell up. And Martin's got a word for that.
It's called physogastric. It's the only one of the bees that actually grows in size once it's emerged from the cell. So drones and workers don't grow again, but queens will. And
really, the amount that she grows will depend on how good a mating she gets. So you know.
And to be honest, we've got yesterday, that first colony in the home apiary, we've had a virgin in there for 4 weeks. She should have been mated by now, and she's obviously not, because her size and shape hasn't changed. She's still a bit small. She's still a bit triangulary, and we euthanized her yesterday.
Well, first of all, we took a photograph of her. Martin had her on her hand and she flew off.
Oh, yes, he did.
She flew off. And so we had to keep her eye on the hive entrance, and she did actually try to go back in the hive. And that's the point where Martin ruthlessly culled her.
Yeah, because she had a yellow dot on her, so she was sticking out like a sore thumb. We don't normally mark our virgins, but because we had doubts about her, we put a mark on her so we could pick her up easily. But
but we have given them another virgin.
Yeah, I mean, but the virgins have a sell-by date, like I say, 4 weeks, I think, and if she did get mated, she's going to be, what she said, satisfied with less.
Yeah, they say actually it's about a 5-week window. If she's not mated she goes past her sell-by date, but as she gets towards the end of that window, she'll be satisfied with a lesser mating, so she won't try so hard. So she may only mate with a few drones, and therefore she'll just be a stopgap queen, and they'll replace her by supersedure later, maybe. So if she gets mated in the early part of her life, then that she'll, she's got more chance of getting a good mating. But if it waits, if the weather's poor and she right at the end, she won't try very hard.
Got another question here. It says, will drones perform a waggle dance in the hive to tell new drones where the DCAs are?
I'm not aware of that, to be honest. I've not read that in any of the books or anything that I've researched. I think it's more to do with when they come out, they sort of aggregate using the drone pheromone and form little clumps, little boys' clubs, as it were. And then those clumps get bigger and bigger and bigger. But I don't think they actually signal like the workers would for a foraging site.
I spend many hours in front of our observation hive. I've never seen a drone waggle dance. They don't do very much when they're back in the hive. They loaf around mostly and they eat. You never see them doing anything physical. They don't even clean themselves. The workers will go around and clean them. I think they may follow each other and they may pair up and follow each other, but I've never seen waggle dancing in drones. Not to say that it's not happening, I've just never seen it.
Someone's asked as well, workers can lay drones but not females. Why? I presume it's because they're not fertilized, is it?
Yeah, it's just because they haven't mated. So sometimes if the queen disappears, or actually you can get laying workers nearly all the time in the colony. There are some rogue workers that have got better developed ovaries, and they will lay eggs most of the time, but the other workers police them and they'll tidy those eggs up or be aggressive to stop. But if the queen disappears altogether and then all the drone disappears as well, lots of workers will lay eggs, and because they haven't mated, they can never be fertilized. So they will always be drones.
Another question.
Sorry, Liz, I was just going to say that this brings about this interesting question of whether workers can move eggs, because you will occasionally get eggs above the queen excluder.
You've opened a can of worms now.
Oh, yes. I definitely think they do, because I had one frame with eggs on and a brand new frame with just foundation. And the next day when I looked, they'd built a queen cell on the new foundation and it was charged with an egg, and they actually produced a queen from that. So they must have moved the egg from one frame to another because it had nothing on it when I put it in.
It's interesting. We have this talk with a lot of the branches that we talk to, and we get differing views, shall we say. Some people are adamant they do, and some people are adamant they don't. And it's probably one thing we may never know.
Yeah. That's beekeepers altogether, so isn't it?
I've seen
Tim's put,
queens eating eggs. I've seen when we introduced a queen once to a colony. Oh no, it was a virgin that came back and there was eggs in the audience. She went around and ate them all. So she ate the previous queen's eggs.
yeah. Somebody's put here, I thought that some research is showing that some DCAs have been monitored and shown to be used for decades in the UK. Have you got any idea if this is continuing from year to year?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I sort of anticipated a little bit. So there is that book that I showed on the screen, which was Beowulf Cooper's book, and about honeybees of the British Isles. And towards the back of it, he's got a section on all the drone congregation areas that have actually been identified in the country, and some that have been identified for several years. Now, up until the time of the writing of that book, it was only about 43 DCAs have been identified. There probably have been some more now. And of those 43, not many appear to come back year after year.
There is that famous one, isn't there, by Gilbert White?
Yeah, the one at Selborne in Dorset, yeah. And it's interesting because if we saw a DCA around here, I would certainly be checking it out sort of every couple of weeks and seeing if it was still there, and certainly the year after and the year after. So I'm sure some do in perhaps prevailing the right conditions. But the evidence in Beowulf's book suggests that it's not that many that seem to keep cropping up year after year.
It's more to do with the geographic, you know, that the wind direction always goes in that way, or that they form there because of, not because of some magical thing.
Not because of some energy lines.
No, because that's the general way that the weather works in that particular.
I tend to think so, yeah. That's what I believe, but I'm open-minded, and I make no apologies for saying that this talk is not about you know, the absolute be-all and end-all of what drone congregation areas and honeybee mating is all about. It's just another way of thinking about it, and have we got it right up to now? And undoubtedly there'll be some research in a few years' time that says that what we're talking about now may not be true.
The last question I've got at the moment is there any difference in the mating behaviour between queens that have been grafted, superseded, or are emergency queens?
I think it's the age probably is going to affect their mating behaviour rather than how they've been produced, but I'm looking at Claire when I say that.
No, I think how well queen is nourished is really important. How many bees look after her is really important. If you've got few bees looking at, you know, producing a queen and she's not very well nourished, she's going to be a more feeble virgin and perhaps not stay up there for so long. So I think it's more to do with how well that queen is nourished rather than how she's produced.
The other thing is that there was some work, that Polish guy, Jerzy Wojcicki, he did some work that suggests that certainly where they promote in emergency mode, if they promote like a 2-day-old larvae, then the subsequent queen won't be so good. That they really want as young a larvae as possible in order to get the best quality queen.
Another question, which I think you've touched on, do ley lines have anything to do with DCAs?
They could do. I'm not saying they do, and I'm not saying they don't, to be honest. There's a guy I used to visit when I was inspecting down in Cornwall, and he used to have a pair of dowsing rods, and he used to put his bait boxes on the intersection of the ley lines, and he was absolutely convinced that that's where they would line up. And interestingly, if you looked across the valley from where he was, there was also an old Iron Age hill fort there, and a lot of people think that some of these old archaeological features were built on ley lines. So he may be right. And in a way, I'd love him to be right. You know, I'd love it to be true because I think it would be wonderful. But I remain to be convinced. But I'd love it to be true.
I'm not convinced. I think it's more to do with wind direction.
Could be. You're just a skeptic.
Tim's also said, you mentioned that different races of bees congregate at different heights or locations. Have you any thoughts on whether this could be used to keep races purer in the crowded UK?
Do you know, it's funny, we were talking about this beforehand, and yeah, if you down in Cornwall, they love this Cornish black bee, as they refer to it, this Apis mellifera mellifera, and they are trying really hard to keep it pure. And they tend to do it by saturating the area down there. So there are very few other bees that are able to mate with the queens other than their own drones. But if you think about the rest of us, like David was saying before the start, you know, most of us have got mongrels, to be honest, and do mongrels actually fly in between those two heights? I think I mentioned Carniolan and Ligustica, you know, Italian and Carniolans in the talk. Now, if you get a cross between a Carniolan and a Ligustica, do the drones congregate and do they fly somewhere in between? I don't know, is the honest answer.
Perhaps they chance are on, that's why they're successful, but perhaps they, you know, move around, you know, different levels, and that's why they're successful. It
could be. I've got no idea, is the honest answer.
Well, it's been a very interesting talk. I've had a lot of people thanking you for it, and everybody, I think, has learnt something from this. I know I've been writing facts down left, right, and centre. Very interesting talk. So I'll hand it over to David now.
So I'll just wind up and just say that I think we've just perhaps witnessed the beekeeping world's equivalent to the two Ronnies. I just think absolutely fantastic that how the two of you just bounce off each other. Absolutely brilliant. And I think somebody also said in the chat that every minute there was some interesting facts and information. And that's definitely true, and delivered in a very palatable and understandable way. So all I can really do is say thanks for an absolutely brilliant talk, and you know, thanks so much for that. And let's hope that the weather picks up so that we can all have a better beekeeping season. Yeah, so I would just like to say thanks very much once again, and wish everybody well. Full supers, as they say.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Pleasure to talk to you all. I hope you have a good season.
Yeah.
So
and you.
If people want to unmute themselves and clap, whatever, feel free.
Yeah, well done, everybody.
Thank you from me anyway. I've thoroughly enjoyed that.
Brilliant.
It's all been so much I've learned off you tonight again. So wonderful. Keep up the good work.
That's it. Lovely. Thanks. Yeah. The other thing I would say is next time you get a queen and she may be a bit defensive and a bit narky, remember what she had to go through to get there in the first place. So give her a break.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll just wind up. But once again, thanks very much. And thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. Nice to see you all.
Yeah. Bye now. Thank you.
Bye then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.